we're going to continue our discussion about policy effects on aggregate demand. Previously, we talked about monetary policy, which is policy set by the Federal Reserve. And now we're going to talk about fiscal policy. So policy set by government, typically the executive and the legislative branch. And we're going to talk about two different effects, the multiplier effect and the crowd-out effect. So let's look at a specific example. Here we have our model. On the right, we have our aggregate demand. And on the left, we have our market for money. Let's suppose that the government wants to stimulate the economy, and therefore they are going to increase the government spending. So by increasing the government spending, that's going to increase the aggregate demand because government spending is a part of that aggregate demand curve. So maybe the way they're going to do this is they're going to spend $80 billion and they're going to send rebate checks to every citizen in the United States. So now there's $80 billion more, and so our aggregate demand curve is going to shift out. Well, this happened. During COVID, the government sent out checks to every individual. And then the question is, if I receive, for my family, say $2,400, what do I do with that money? Well, if I spend all of it, then that's going to have what we call the multiplier effect. And that is, it's not just the initial $80 billion, but it's that this $80 billion is going to continue to cycle through the system, right? So this is an additional shift in aggregate demand that results when expansionary fiscal policies increases income and thereby increases consumer spending. So it may not be just that first shift, that might be the initial $80 billion, but we might see an additional shift in aggregate demand when individuals start to spend that, and then as other individuals spend that money. So we can come up with this multiplier, and this is going to be equal to 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. Right? And so when people get that money, not everybody spends all of it. They might save some of it. So let's suppose that they save their marginal propensity to consume is equal to 0.75. So for every dollar they get, they save 25 cents and spend the other 4 or the other 25 cents. Well, in this case, this would equal 1 over 1 minus 0.75. And so this leads to a multiplier of 4. So that initial $80 billion, right here, is we're going to multiply that by 4. And so the total impact that this policy had on increasing aggregate demand is it's going to shift aggregate demand out and have an effect of $320 billion. And that's the multiplier effect. So it's not just the initial spending, but it's the multiplicative effect of that initial spending. However, when the aggregate demand shifts out and now individuals have more money, it actually causes an increase. Now we're going over here to the left side. It causes an increase in the demand for money. So now the demand for money increases, which takes the interest rate. So before, the interest rates were here at R1, and now with that shift in aggregate demand, interest rates are going to increase to R2. Well, that increase in interest rates is going to have a negative effect on investment. So that's going to now take this aggregate demand curve and shift it left. How far left depends on the size of that effect. And so we might actually have the resulting aggregate demand curve right here. And so this would be this left effect is going to be what we call the crowd out effect. And the crowd out effect is when expansionary fiscal policy raises the interest rate and thereby reduces investment spending. So here we have our multiplier effect and the crowd out effect. So the multiplier effect is working to the right. The crowd-out effect is working to the left. And where the actual resulting line goes is indeterminate. Is if the crowd-out effect is bigger than the multiplier effect, it could actually lead to a decrease in the aggregate demand. And so that's why when you think of these different policies, you need to take into account not just the initial spending, in this case government spending, but the resulting multiplier effect and the resulting crowd-out effect that such fiscal policy might have on aggregate demand.